Welcome to the third episode of Cities in Motion, a three-part podcast series exploring urban mobility in a time of transformation. I'm your host, Sandra Zialcita. This podcast is brought to you by TomTom and Smart Cities Dive. In our first two episodes, we journeyed across America, first exploring congestion pricing in New York City, and then looking at how the upcoming Olympics could reshape transportation in car-centric Los Angeles. In this episode, we're heading north to San Jose, California, a city in the epicenter of Silicon Valley. With about 1 million residents, San Jose is the third largest city in California. But where San Jose ranks first is in the adoption of electric vehicles. In this episode, we are going to learn all we can from the experience of San Jose about the impact of EVs and EV charging infrastructure on urban transportation. We'll talk about what made San Jose so receptive to EVs, how the city is approaching charging infrastructure, and how EVs align with the city's other goals like encouraging the use of public transit, walking, and cycling. I'm joined today by Ramses Madou, Division Manager for Planning, Policy, and Sustainability at San Jose City's Department of Transportation, and Andy Marchant, Traffic Expert at TomTom. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sandra. Really appreciate you inviting me in here for this exciting conversation.
Yeah, same. Thanks, Sandra.
Okay, let's dive in. So listeners of our first two podcasts will be familiar with some of the transportation challenges in New York and Los Angeles, which are two very different urban landscapes. Ramses, how would you describe San Jose from a transportation perspective, and how did it become what it is today?
Yeah, San Jose, it's a pretty interesting place. In the 50s and 40s was actually quite a normal-sized city of around 80 to 100,000. In that post-war World War II era, the national story of track homes sprouting up everywhere and growing like little mushroom pods happened in the Bay Area as well. The city council and city manager at that time set out a specific strategy of annexing as many of the neighboring growth areas as possible. They even used the phrase, we want to be the LA of the North. And so we saw this very, I would say, unplanned and from a transportation perspective, non-strategic growth pattern. We just gobbled up every single housing development that was put out there. And so you have this very oddly shaped city that the backbone of the transportation system is twofold. One, we do have the old Union Pacific Railway that runs from San Francisco through the city, but that's only one artery, right? The rest of the city, the major roads are in fact the old farm roads. For those who know a little bit of history down here, it used to be called Valley of Heart's Delight, and we were full of orchards and other farming areas. And it has created a very strange environment for transportation because basically we built around the car, and that building around the car is built on the bones of a farm infrastructure. So we have very, very constrained major traffic arteries. So a lot of our main roads have to channel a lot of traffic through them.
So Ramses, how well connected is San Jose's transit system to systems that serve the rest of the Bay Area? Would you say that most citizens get around via public transit, or do more people use a car?
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. Our public transit system in the South Bay is not very good. It does not afford the kinds of transit ridership that we would like in terms of service levels. And that has to do with both that land use piece I was just talking about, and go into that a little bit more. But right now we're seeing about 80% of folks driving alone in their cars in San Jose. So for those who are the urban planning or transportation planning minded, that's the number we're sitting at. And at the same time, we do have a city goal of shooting for having that. So just cutting that in half in the next couple decades. So we have a lot to do there. But currently our transit system, we have light rail. We have as I already mentioned, the old UP track, which is now run by Caltrain. And then we have the buses in our city. We're looking to expand, but at the moment it is not up to snuff in terms of getting folks around unless they absolutely have to use it.
So over to Andy, based on the traffic data, how long on average do people in San Jose spend on their trips in the car?
Yeah, San Jose is actually pretty good considering that, as Ramses said, public transport isn't really kind of heavily used. The car is the main method of transport. And within the data that we collect, we try and benchmark everything so you can make comparisons. So over a 10-kilometer distance, which is around about 6.5, 7 miles, something like that. On average, it's about 12 minutes to cover that distance in that San Jose area, which when you compare it to its neighbor further up the bay in San Francisco, is less than half of the time it takes there. So congestion levels are pretty good compared to a lot of cities in the US. So around 12 minutes, something like that. At peak times, so we're recording this, it's first thing in the morning in San Jose, and currently it's around about 20 minutes. So take into consideration that people are on that morning commute or kind of going to their first meetings of the day. But I think 12 minutes is pretty good when you compare it to a lot of other cities.
What are some of the things that affect that congestion rate, you would say?
Yeah, it's funny, Ramses mentions that, San Jose is built on these kind of farmers' tracks, these farmers' routes. So you consider that when the infrastructure was created that many years ago, there was probably never a thought of the volume of cars and the types of cars that would be traveling. And I think that's probably what we see in a lot of locations is the infrastructure in a lot of cities doesn't match necessarily the demand that we see today. There's also big differences between, say, US cities and European cities. So a lot of European cities are very similar to San Jose, in fact, where they're kind of, they're built at a point of the location that was built around an industry. So a lot of European cities are maybe built around ports. So where goods used to come in and then get distributed out to different parts of the country. Whereas a lot of US cities are built near highways. So you actually have highways that skirt very, very close to the city center. That helps with average speeds and uplifts a lot of the volumes. A lot of other cities, think of London, think of Paris, think of Amsterdam, Berlin. Whilst they've got highways, they kind of go round the cities. If you're driving on the highway, you want to kind of bypass the city almost and get round it as quick as possible. In the US, you find that the highways actually come very, very close to the cities. So different kinds of infrastructure. Some cities are able to change and update the infrastructure. Others have less capabilities just because of the structure of the cities, narrow streets, historic buildings, etc.
Right. Now I'm going to go back to Ramses. You're part of San Jose's Department of Transportation. What is your team's main goal, and how does that relate to electrification?
I would say the city's transportation goals are our goals, right? And so the city's transportation goals can be wrapped up into three main objectives. One is safety. Roads are an incredibly risky area of behavior, right? People on phones driving, people trying to walk across the street, stray cats in the road, dealing with all of the fun things that create a roadway system and making sure that folks can get around. Now, under safety, we've changed our focus from making sure those who drive can be safe to those who are most vulnerable can be safe. So we're really looking at that Vision Zero directive as what it means to talk about safety in the roadway so that we can increase folks who walk, bike, and take transit. It is one of the biggest indicators. Folks feel safe out there drives some of our other main goals. Our second one is an environmental impact, right? So reducing the amount of environmental impact that's coming out of the transportation system. In San Jose, depending on the version of the metrics you look at, between 45 and 60% of all emissions in San Jose come straight out of the transportation sector. And so we're really trying to reduce that impact. And again, to do that, we need safe roads so that people can get out of their cars and use these other these other modes. And then third is social equity. We do dare to still say in this political environment that social equity is a primary focus of what we do. We still have an Office of Racial Equity here in San Jose, and we work to make sure that we are addressing the wrongs of the past in the way that transportation system has been developed. So how do EVs fit into that? Well, trickles down. That the environmental one, of course, is the one that everybody focuses on, right? And it is the true driver of it. We know in San Jose that we're not going to get rid of all vehicles. And in fact, we like them. Having vehicles is fine. We have too many of them. So we might need to reduce that a bit through mode change. But we know automobiles and trucks and all that will be part of our system for the foreseeable future. And so what we need to do is hit, every element of carbon reduction strategy as we can. And so reducing the amount of tailpipe emissions is a big piece of our pie. So it's helping those who want to drive electric vehicles get the charging and assistance they need to live their life as hindrance free from their transportation mode is an important part of our mission as well.
So you've talked about environmental impact as one of the main goals that the Department of Transportation has. And obviously you mentioned the contribution of EVs or kind of the transition towards electrification, the role it plays in that, as well as, of course, improving the bike lane system and such. What is the government really doing to encourage EV adoption among citizens? Why are there so many EVs in San Jose?
Yeah, I'll take that into two different questions here. I'll start with why do we think there are so many EVs in San Jose, and then get into what we're doing. So San Jose is interesting, right? As you opened up in your intro, saying San Jose is one of the highest adoption areas in the world, though the Nordic countries are kind of taken over now in those metrics, but it's a very early adopter area. So a couple thoughts on kind of why that's happening. One, it's wealth. The ability to buy new expensive vehicles was evident here. There was a lot of wealth and a lot of folks who were that. There's also an early adopter kind of mentality out here, right? We're Silicon Valley. We're supposed to be on the edge of what's coming. We're supposed to do all that, right? There's also a deep-seated environmental mentality here too. Growing up here, you very rarely heard the voices that say climate change isn't real or anything like that locally, right? It's very much a environmentally focused piece. But another piece that I found interesting actually came partly from a conversation Andy and I had a little while ago, was thinking about how the land use actually is an important factor in this choice. A lot of early adopters were able to circumvent the problems that many of other people have with electric vehicles because we're a single family home oriented area. We are in San Jose in particular, but most of the Silicon Valley and the South Bay, we're 80+% single family homes. And the ability to install a level 2 charger in your garage or on the outside of your house and charge your car when you come home gets around many of the issues that hinder people in other areas from getting that. So I think it's this kind of interesting mix of ideological bent, money, and then this land use mix that kind of put it all together. So that's why I think EVs are so popular here or have been taking off so much. Now, what are we doing in the city to help EVs come about, right? We see it as an important goal to instigate them, but we also don't see ourselves as a market player per se, meaning we don't want to be a major element of those choices. But what do we do? So one, we are working with private companies who want to come in and build charging. We are working to reduce the regulatory burden on those projects that want to come in, right? We need a new fueling infrastructure to make this work, right? Those who are at home and can do it, they built it themselves. In that regard, we also reduced the permit burden. So we created a streamlined permit system for those who want to build charging at home. But then going back to the private companies, we also have a lot of companies who want to come in and replace current gasoline-based fuel systems on stations with electric vehicle stations. So they're coming in and trying to figure out what the business model for this is. They're learning that, developing land is quite expensive. Part of that expense is what the city process brings. And so we're working on, we have a group between our planning, building, code enforcement group, our energy department and DOT kind of looking at how do we make it so that companies can come in and develop quickly these kinds of things. So we're looking at maps. Where do we think these are most easy to install based on land use regulations? How can we make the permitting process streamlined so that we're not hanging these projects up in process for months or years, all that. But I think the bigger thing that's important for a city like ours to do is really looking at those who don't have ready access to charging, those who don't have the ability to put a charger in their home, those who have a challenge in getting the capital to move into this, right? And so we do have a larger program looking at a few things. One, most of what we do as a city in terms of actually putting chargers out there. So we do have a city-run charger program, meaning we have electric vehicle chargers in our garages on street side. But now we're really focusing on how do we get chargers into lower income neighborhoods who traditionally are challenged to get into this market, right? So we have a fast charger program from our energy department. They're going to be putting out an array of fast chargers at a lot of community centers and libraries. And they're specifically going to keep the cost of that, basically as low as they possibly can and still run the program to enable folks to access that. The other thing we've done in this regard is changing our building codes to require a larger amount of electric vehicle wiring and readiness in multifamily developments. So if somebody's building a large condo building or apartment complex, they are now required to electrify a significant amount of the parking spaces, and then an even larger amount of spaces need to be what we call EV ready, meaning there's conduit that goes to there. And so that when they so choose, someone can run the wire from the electric box out to there. The other things we're doing is mapping out where there are charging deserts and where there is enough charging. We use those maps to both guide our own work as well as guide our conversations with private companies who are trying to come in and build them, right? And say, hey, if you want to build chargers here, San Jose East Side, there's not much charging and all of that. And the last thing I'll bring up in the moment is also helping folks learn about the vehicles and learn about the financing around the vehicles. For a lot of folks we talk to, we have an emerging mobility plan that looks at everything from EVs and scooters and EVTOLs and all this fun, crazy stuff that's coming. And a lot of what we learned in that was there's a significant perception, and this shouldn't be surprising to anybody, but there's a significant perception that electric vehicles are for rich white folks who live up in Palo Alto, who live in the richer areas of our city and our region. And while Tesla ruled the electric vehicle market, I think that made a lot of sense. But what we're seeing now is that there's a lot of more entry-level vehicles on the market, and there's now a healthy secondary market for vehicles. And so there's a larger portion of the population that could afford to buy these. And but they're getting folks to have an experience with the vehicles, getting people to understand what financial incentives there are, and kind of getting this vehicle type into people's minds as they're making those decisions is something we're working on. So we have financial advisory groups in multiple languages working with folks to just kind of think about, hey, this is what you could do to finance these or get financial incentives. And we have ride and drive experience events, right, where we invite folks, basically a marketing event that the city helps put on. All right. And so we put in this, we'll put cars out there with the companies and give folks a chance to sit in them and drive them around, things like that.
So it's great to hear all the initiatives San Jose's Department of Transportation is taking to ensure that EV charging is equitable and available to everyone who needs it. But we know that's not an easy activity for cities to do. Now going to Andy, how can cities leverage data to ensure that EV charging stations are accessible to all citizens who need it, especially in urban areas with high population density?
It's a good question. I think Ramses kind of touched on it a little bit as well. There's definitely huge differences. So, I live in the UK. UK has reasonably big adoption rate of EV vehicles. I think in the first half of this year, or maybe the second half of last year, it was the largest percentage of vehicle sales versus combustion engines across the whole of Europe. So adoption of EV vehicles in the UK was pretty high. Having said that, the infrastructure sucks. Okay. I live in a small town. It's about 30,000 people. We have no fast charger. In fact, I tell a lie. We have one fast charger, but it's in the area of a car dealership. So again, it's not publicly available. So we have no fast chargers, but we do have a very similar model to San Jose, in as much as the majority of people live in a house, as opposed to an apartment. So for those that have electric vehicles, it's much easier to put your own charger in your garage, on your driveway. For those that have to park on the road, it's much more difficult. There isn't the capacity to pull cables across the pavement where pedestrians walk. So there is a big challenge out there for better EV adoption to address these things like range anxiety and charging anxiety and make sure the network is sufficient. And I think a lot of companies are out there building these networks. The obvious places to put them are at supermarkets, fast food outlets, those kind of places where people are going to spend 20, 30, 40 minutes perhaps, inside doing something, shopping malls. But that doesn't maybe cover everyone's needs. So we do work with a lot of network operators. We can look at where people's journeys start and end. We have EV routing software. So again, when you drive an EV and you use TomTom maps and navigation, you can actually build your route and it will show you where you need to charge and at what point in your journey to charge. And we can collate all of that data together and really start to highlight where those black spots are, or those gray areas where perhaps there's not enough coverage, or we often find that we're not able to get people as far as we could, and we're having to charge earlier because there is then a lack of charging stations. So yeah, the data on journeys that happen around different locations, different countries, that we collect through the data and the probes and the vehicles that use TomTom software, yeah, a lot of that data is now being used actively by these network operators to really cope with the demand and put charging stations in the most efficient places for where people are traveling.
So, Ramses, you've talked a lot about the different efforts the Department of Transportation is taking to encourage EV adoption. But we also know that California is susceptible to power outages. So, how do you then balance the demand for EVs while also considering the availability of the energy grid?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two different questions in there, right? Like, what do we do when we get brownouts or blackouts even? And then what do we do with this increasing demand on the electric system, right, in general? And so in emergency situations with the brownouts and blackouts, we currently don't have an express strategy to deal with that. It is obviously a worry. It does kind of speak to, as I used to do in high school with my car, you don't keep your car at a low charge or a low fuel rate, right? You try to keep yourself charged up in case these kinds of things happen. There are prioritization of electrical services when brownouts and blackouts happen, right? So airports and hospitals and things like that do their best to keep those up. Those are usually on generators and things like that. And so there isn't a great kind of emergency strategy yet. Obviously, this is going to be something that needs to be kind of, I would say, managed not at a city level. This is more of a county or even statewide level issue that needs to be kind of thought about. What we are seeing that I wouldn't say is a city strategy per se, but we are seeing a lot of folks, again, in the single family home areas who end up, basically creating off-grid power environments, right? So you have solar panels growing quite a bit, slowing down a little bit right now because of tax incentive changes, but still, there's a lot out there. And then a lot of those households are now also installing those batteries, the battery packs at home. And so then those can become charging. And then interestingly, in some very fancy systems, you can have the two-way electrical exchange, right? Where the car may actually be your emergency power supply, depending on all that. So that's kind of the emergency scenario. And obviously, it isn't kind of in the place it should be just yet as to what we're going to do when that happens. But the second issue is, what are we doing with the grid writ large? All right, we're seeing immense new load requests on the electrical grid. That's coming for the transportation sector as well as the growth in data centers and things like that. And what we see in San Jose, and I think we're seeing this in a lot of other places, the electric grid is responding, meaning PG&E and other major power suppliers are bringing in huge new projects. We have two new major electric grid upgrades happening in San Jose right now, one by PG&E and one by another company called LS Power, that are bringing in upwards of 20 to 30 new megawatts into the city, right? And so what I think that you get a bit of, I would say maybe a moral panic around this sometimes. Oh my God, electric vehicles are going to come in and overwhelm the grid. Now, that's true if the grid stays where it is today, but nobody who works on the grid thinks that's what we should do. Everybody who works on the grid is doing the work to create more capacity, to create the larger transmission lines, to create the generation sites. And in California's case, most of that's green, luckily. So we're seeing the response we need at the grid level as far as we can tell so far. And I think that, to me, that's actually a hopeful story that's worth getting out there, right? It's this constant moral panic, right, around, oh my God, the electric vehicles are going to kill the grid. That's not actually what we're seeing in reality. We're seeing that them growing roughly together.
So it's good for us to know that, as the demand is increasing, so is the ability of the power grid to support that. And I think that gives a lot of people who are thinking of switching to EVs a little bit more confidence, a little bit more peace of mind. But we know from experience that a lot of people face different kinds of anxieties when they're making the shift to EV. Andy, maybe you can speak a little bit more about how data can help address the challenges that people face when they're making the switch.
I think there was a big knee-jerk reaction at the beginning because, people go, I'm buying this car. It's got a certain distance I can drive. It's kind of untested. There may not be somewhere I can charge, but I know that there are literally thousands of fuel stations, and I can pull into a fuel station and in less than 2 minutes, I can be back up to 100%. I can be on my way again. And I think at the beginning, there was a little bit of hesitation or nervousness. And I bought an EV for the first time last year. And I was the same, the first time I drove it, I was like, am I going to be able to get there? And then you kind of get, you kind of shake your head and go, well, don't be ridiculous. When do you ever drive in one hit the complete capacity or distance of an EV? Probably very, very infrequently. Maybe if you're lucky once a year, right? To go on holiday, to visit family. And at that point, you plan, okay? You know where the charging stations are. Every car you buy now that's an EV has a map inside it, has data that shows you where they are. And as TomTom, we do a lot of work over the years to really address this range anxiety problem, which was, can I get to where I need to get and still, have enough in an emergency if I need to take a detour or something else? I think the answer is yes. And it's, as I say, it's unlikely that you're going to drive 200-300 miles in one day or in one journey, that you're going to go from 100% charge down to zero. And most systems now allow you to kind of preset those. So you say, on my journey, I never want to be below 25%. And when I get to my destination, I want to have at least 15%, let's say, in my battery. So knowing that if I'm reaching the end of the line, I'm at a hotel, I'm at a relative, or I'm back in my home, then I've probably got somewhere to charge overnight that's gonna take me back up again. So I think the data is there. And what TomTom has focused on a lot in the past few years is creating that into the routing algorithms, so that when you are driving and you're on an EV charge, it's constantly looking at what the charging options are. And it might well be that, you say, I want to get to no less than 25% charge at any one point, but maybe because of where the charging stations are located, maybe we're going to charge you at 60% at one point, and then the next section before your next charge will be longer or shorter, depending how the calculations are made. What's advanced, I think, in the last couple of years, especially, is that a lot more charging stations are now what we call dynamic. So we can actually see when charging availability is there. So again, it means that when you are routed to a charging point, you're unlikely to be routed somewhere where there's no availability. Because the last thing you want to do is pull in there and there's 5 other cars in a queue in front of you. We know when the demand is high at certain locations. So it may be that the location that we were going to send you to on your journey, actually we send you to a different one when you get close by, because we know that the original one was high volume. There's lots of people waiting, or all the chargers are constantly full, but we can then take you to one that's probably got more chance of being available when you get there.
So I guess the message for anyone who's listening and thinking of switching to an EV is that there's actually a lot of data available today to address some of the concerns you might have, whether it's range or charging anxiety. There's data available to help assuage those fears, if you will. So really nothing to fear if you're thinking about going EV. But now I'm going to go back to Ramses. You mentioned earlier that the Department of Transportation is also encouraging other modes of transit, right? So you have public transit, you have walking, you have cycling. How do you balance supporting EV adoption while also encouraging these other modes of transport?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Sandra. And it's the constant juggling of most departments of transportation in major cities, right? We have to walk and chew gum and do about 10 other things at the same time, always. San Jose is 180 square miles. It's about 1 million people. There's a lot to solve in our city for transportation wise. And so we see these as complementary efforts, right? We see, like I said, those big 3 goals, safety, environment, and social equity, they all kind of come together in having to do this. Technically, I have a team that does emerging mobility, and on that team, there's a person and roughly a half who focus on electric vehicle elements. And I have the team that does specifically active transportation programs that build out these things. But there's also a lot of confluence in this, right? So part of our electric vehicle program that we're doing in the city includes electric bike charging on the publicly available chargers, right? So we're seeing people be able to charge their Chevy or their Tesla or whatever it is, and someone else can come in and plug in their Marin bike as well, right? And so we're seeing that. We're looking at ways to combine our public bike share system, which has electric bikes on it and charging stations for that. How does that become part of the electric vehicle thing? Do we pair it with these major vehicle, the car chargers, or do they have their own system, right? The electrification of the transportation sector isn't only in cars, right? It is kind of happening across the board, right? And I think the e-bike area is a really interesting one, right? Because it's basically made riding a moped cool again, right? It's just a different form factor. Now you can use these bikes and they're you see particularly a lot of elderly folks, and then a lot of kind of, how you say, those in their dapper dress who would be afraid to ride a bike because they'd get to work sweaty. Now they can ride these electric bikes in as well. And so we're getting this great confluence of like, hey, as we electrify the system and as we get more electrons into transportation, sure, we need the cars to be electrified. We need the trucks to be electrified, but we're seeing all these other things, scooters, bikes, and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of both, we need to have a lot of people doing a lot of things, which is hard in the public sector right now. Money is shrinking, particularly in America, in those regions. And at the same time, there's a lot of overlap where we're having folks actually who are working on the electric vehicle element are now also helping make the biking, particularly the biking or micro mobility, as we call it, because it's scooters as well, arena also progress.
No, that's great to hear that the city is also prioritizing not just the electrification of cars, but also the electrification of bikes. Coming from Amsterdam, I absolutely love my electric bikes, so I can totally relate to that and how it might be easier for some people to switch to an electric bike than maybe an electric car. But still, a lot of great initiatives by the city's Department of Transportation. Now, before we go, Ramses, if there's anyone listening who wants to find you and your work or learn more about what the San Jose Department of Transportation is doing, how do they find you?
Well, the easiest way is to go to the City of San Jose's website or just look me up on the web. We're all over the place. We got lots of projects out there. And yeah, I think that's the best way. Our contact information is up there as well. All of our projects, planning and electric vehicle wise, all that kind of stuff is there. But of course, if someone wants to drop me a line, go ahead. And yeah, I would love to be part of this conversation. Been doing this for about 20 years now. And it's been a constantly evolving world, right, of what it means to be part of transportation and mitigate its impacts. But also, I mean, almost every single person, almost every single day interacts with the transportation system, right? And as we try and steer this massive ship of the transportation world into something more environmentally sustainable, it's just great to be kind of part of this larger conversation.
And Andy, if people want to connect to you and find out more about what TomTom is doing in this space?
So yeah, I think TomTom.com is probably the first port of call, and that will give you all the information that we've talked about today, including electric vehicles, navigation, different modes of transport, etc. We've mentioned a couple of times, we release this annual report called the TomTom Traffic Index. So again, if people want to look up their local city or the city closest to them, they can do. Again, that's tomtom.com/traffic index. And if they want to connect with me directly, then look me up on LinkedIn.
And that's it for today. Thanks to Ramses and Andy for sharing the time and insights today. And thanks so much to our audience for joining us. Now, if this episode left you feeling excited or curious about how our cities are changing, then tune into TomTalks, a new podcast exploring the transformative journeys cities are undergoing in our rapidly changing world. Each episode features in-depth conversations with leading experts where we tackle the urban challenges cities face and the innovative solutions that arise from tackling these problems. Join us as we uncover different tools to create smarter, more livable cities for everyone. Subscribe now and be part of the conversation. Until then, take care.